PM, I understand you're working on a new film with painter Rob Pryor.
Mm-hmm.
How did the two of you meet?
Well, there's a number of years ago, I was producing these events for this video game company. And in this building, this studio in North Hollywood, in the backside of that company that does these live video game events, I would be producing them. And in that same building, Rob Pryor has his studio. So there's a lot of moments that I would see this painter coming around, but I didn't really know exactly who he was. We just would say hello from time to time. At some point I realized he was from Ohio, I'm from Cincinnati. So there was kind of a kinship of just saying, hey, how's it going? But I didn't really know much about him and his work at that present moment. But we'd always see each other for like 2 or 3 years.
What is the movie?
Yeah, the film is called Devoted in Time, and it's a study of creativity. Where does creativity come from? The importance of creativity on society. Within that picture, there's this idea of following this painter, Rob Pryor, and all of the painters that he mentors. He mentors about 5 other amazing painters, and studying through their mindsets. Where are they inspired? Where is it coming from? And the realization that our society is built entirely on inspiration and creativity. I mean, the idea that the film itself is not about schools being defunded for their art programs, but there was a part of me noticing a lot of programs getting lack of funds towards their art, the art side of institutions. And I started to realize that that's such a huge misstep. Because where would a cure from cancer come from? It would come from creativity. So we should be amplifying this. Now, the film is not going to talk about schools being defunded in their art programs, but to me, the film is almost a response to seeing that happening across the nation. And this picture also, though, is watching this painter as he prepares to go to space. So there's a part of it where he might become the first painter in history to go up and create a whole collection of work. But you know, there's a lot of different ups and downs to that ride, whether it's weather or any kind of side of going to space. So anything could disrupt that possibility, or it might come through. But regardless, the film's about creativity, and Rob is a catalyst through that study. And then by the end of the picture, he might just so happen to also end up in space.
How did the movie come about?
Well, it's actually a very interesting story. I take all these bubble baths. So I really figured out, I think, a life hack. There's a moment where when you meditating and coming to the point of clearing your mind entirely, because we have this antenna and ideas come to us. And I believe that the clearest your mind is, the more you're open to these ideas. And there's a moment I'm in a bubble bath and I had this concept in my head. There's some filmmakers I really love, like Ben Rivers. He's an artist, makes these beautiful films. Nathaniel Dorsky, an experimental filmmaker. And they've explored making movies with the Bolex camera. And I own a Bolex. And there was a moment where I was in a bubble bath, going back to that, and I was thinking to myself, it'd be really interesting to make a 10 or 15 minute short experimental art film with a painter. And then I thought to myself, what painter do I know? And Rob Pryor was the only one that I actually knew to some degree. I didn't know him well enough to understand his background or much about it. But I went to him and told him about the little film I wanted to make, and he was really excited about figuring it out and learning more. And then slowly it built into us actually making a whole feature-length project together, all shot entirely on the Bolex camera. And also, because it's a film with painters and studying that creative side of painting, there's a big element that I was able to get every available film stock for 16 millimeter and be able to utilize that throughout the piece. Yeah.
What kind of questions were you trying to answer, either maybe before you approached him or during the process? What creative questions did you have about the process, about why we do what we do?
Well, I'm in this place now in my life where I want the films that I'm working on to be a deep curiosity of my own. I want to think of something that I'm not sure of the answer to and let the film inform me through the creative process. Something that I feel with filmmaking, you're always kind of tied into this shooting for 30 days, having a feature script, right? And having to prep for X amount of time and having X amount of dollars to create the piece. And so we rarely get the opportunity to flow like a painter, to catch a creative wave and just tackle it. So these new projects I'm working on, there's a side of it where when the creative notion has hit me, I want to just follow it blindly. So some of the questions that come up are pure curiosities, and I don't want to know the answers. I don't want to know exactly where I'm headed with that project. I want that project to kind of facilitate something. And then my hopes are, if I'm completely immersed in this idea of trying to learn, that something new will come through the film. Where a lot of times when people are out making a documentary, let's say, they kind of already know the direction they want to push people. They kind of have, they got their note cards on the wall and their, act 1, act 2, act 3, but I feel like there is a notion that we could catch a creative wave just like a painter or a sculptor or somebody working on a medium that doesn't need as many people. And so I'm kind of exploring that notion within Devoted in Time.
That's fascinating. I think you said in a prior interview that there's been no time in history than the present where filmmakers are closer to painters.
Yeah. In this present moment, I feel 100 years from now, when I look back, this will be considered the golden era of cinema. And the reason I feel that way is we have all of these different forms that we can create with. We have Super 8, we have 16, we have 35, we have 65 millimeter film stocks. And then you also have mini DV tapes. You have the red sensor, the Alexa, you have all these, and the red sensor, it has reds and blacks that are a little different than other digital sensors. I think mini DV tapes are a little closer to pastel colors. So now when you read something and you want to make a story or have a real specific vision, if you understand all those different formats, you can almost create it with a different canvas. At one point, Harmony Korine made a film called Trash Humpers, and he used VHS cameras, VHS tapes, and it has a particular quality to it. And yeah, sure, you can get all these digital inputs to put on top of video, but inevitably there will be something more random about the quality that you actually shoot with. Like if you take a digital filter and throw it on your digital image to create it to look like VHS tape, it'll probably have a randomness that's on a loop. And it won't actually be a consistent randomness. Like for instance, when you shoot with film, the grain is creating the image. And that's a chemical reaction. But if you put digital grain on top of the image, it's not creating the image, it's trying to trick the mind. So there's such a difference, and nowadays we are so much closer to the painter where you can really choose what the story's asking for, what canvas the story wants to be propelled onto.
I know someone that said the period between not having a job and not knowing what you were going to do next was one of the best feelings at times, aside from the scariness, the uncertainty, but there was like this freedom in it of not knowing where they were going. It reminds me of that. You said you didn't want to really know, you just want to be like led, and I just thought that was great. So.
Well, I do have a thought on that, and that is I'm working on the 4th feature film now, so it'll be 4 features and 38 short films, and I do feel that in between projects I fall into a depression. That I feel like, for me, it's not about putting the movie out. That is what I'm doing it for. It's really to be immersed in the creative process. I feel so lost when I'm outside of actually making a project. And yeah, so I feel like there is a part of me on a personal level where as soon as I'm getting to that tail end of being done with something, I need to be immersed in something else. And the festival stuff is great, and going out and talking to people about the film and showing the film is what it's about. It's exciting to hear people's response to it. But there's something so much more fulfilling to my heart and my soul if I'm truly in the middle of creating something, juxtaposing images, which is one reason why I end up wearing so many hats on the movies, why I end up editing, doing sound design, mixing, color grading. I have a pseudonym I do stuff under named Sander Hamilton. So sometimes I won't like put my name as a colorist or this or that. And I have amazing colorist Joshua Duncan, who I've loved working with over the years. But sometimes it's hard for me to step back from something. Unless I have another project lined up, then I can hand stuff off. So I love to collaborate. I love to work with people. But I have to be immersed inside that creative moment. And I fear not being in there, honestly.
Do you think being lost, though, is a negative thing? Because it leads you to start new projects where a lot of people could give up and be, oh, there's no money in it. I don't want to do it. This is all rigged. But it seems like you have this curiosity, and that the being lost is actually in some ways a positive because it propels you.
You know, the truth is that filmmaking saved my life. So there's a complete honesty in the fact that if somebody's looking at filmmaking and thinking there's no money in it, right, then they're maybe not meant to be creating, because money comes and goes, right? And no matter what, you're always going to have these bottom of the barrel moments. The other day, a friend of mine was talking about how there's a tiny percentage of people who go after their dreams and sustain that goal. And I really think there's a moment where, like, I was terrified to be broke early on. I mean, that just inevitably in all of us. None of us want to be evicted, and we're all terrified. But then at some point, I felt myself break through that barrier of fear and became comfortable within that terrifying notion of feeling lost within our society. And the real truth is, I feel like a lot of people are really terrified to take that next step in, but that might go back to the idea that our whole system, the school system, everything is kind of built around follow this path and you'll be okay. Follow this path and pay bills. Follow this path, get married, do this, have kids, go to college. And it doesn't really propel people to go after the randomness of your dreams, because there's no straight path. When you look back at everything, when I look back at April 23rd, 2006, the day I started making films, when I look back at that moment, it feels like a straight path now to get here, but it's really going all over the place to try to sustain myself and get to this point. But there's a comfortable side of struggling as an artist that at some point, I really strongly believe thoroughly that the more you don't worry about your finances, the more things actually just come to you. It's when you feel this fear that you push against these possibilities, I feel. But, it's not for everybody. It's definitely a struggle, and there's a lot in filmmaking that can be very difficult to sustain and keep pushing forward. Especially when you're faced with the whole society of Hollywood standards of the American dream, people making a ton of money from, a project and looking like overnight successes, where really most of those people that were overnight successes really had been making films for a decade.
Sure.
Yeah.
And going back to the following the straight and narrow path
Yeah.
of the sort of the corporate 9 to 5. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with stability, especially if people have kids.
Yeah.
But you can be pushed out the door, and it can be a rude awakening. That was the beautiful thing about the Jim Carrey documentary, talking about his dad and how, he'd sacrificed and then in his 50s was let go. And so that can happen too. So you kind of decide, do I want to follow things now or do I want to wait? And for some people to wait, that's totally fine,
It is. And everybody has their own paths in life, and there is no right way. Really, feeling happy is the most important element to every life. And there's nothing that's going to bring you happiness, money or fame or any of that is not going to create happiness. But I love what you mentioned there of Jim Carrey, because it's so true in what he said. And he talked about this in his commencement speech, and I've watched it over and over and over. Every once in a while I put it on while I'm cleaning my apartment and just listen to it. And he talks about how his father was let go from this safe job, so he taught him a couple things in life. One, that comedy was the best currency, and then the other one was you can fail at something you hate doing, so you might as well fail at what you love.
What's your reaction to this statement, PM? Being an artist isn't what you think it is?
It's true. This is something that is just complete honesty. I was born an artist, And unfortunately, that was not the best thing to be in Hamilton, Ohio. That's where I'm originally from. Because being an artist, you see things differently and you do things differently. And unfortunately, for my childhood, I stood out because of that factor. So it was better to actually fit in than to stand out. And I think there's this kind of romantic notion to being an artist, and this idea that, you know, it's maybe self-exploratory action creates some kind of romantic notion that you're living your life in a more beautiful manner than others perhaps, but really there's a lot of chaos in the mind, and I think that chaos drives people to become an artist and maybe drives them to a point of trying to understand why their mind ticks the way it ticks. And that's not really something a lot of people actually want in their life. We want to feel like we're in this romantic place, and everybody wants to feel like their lives are a little bit better than other people's lives, but I think that might be social media causing people to look at a curated version of everybody else and wonder why their curated version isn't on the same level. But every day is a struggle for everyone. And I think Basquiat, one of my favorite painters of all time, I think he had a really deep struggle every single day, but yet he became incredibly successful with Andy Warhol as a mentor. And but one thing that Rob Pryor says is you wouldn't want to be inside of his brain, you know, and it's a hard place to be, and there's a struggle, and every day you have to get up and face the fact that you're pushing forward. I love life, and I think being optimistic is the best notion forward. And whether you're an artist or not, it's really incredibly important to find your slice of happiness. And it's not super difficult. First off, the number one thing to being happy is being really content with where you are. My dad, he studied a lot of Buddhism, and he taught me a Buddhist law when I was growing up, and that is you have to navigate from where you are, not from where you wish to be. And that, I think, translates to everyone in every situation. And even the person living in a tent on the street, they still actually have something to be grateful for. And then that drives the energy in a positive manner, and I think people are attracted to positive energy. If you live in that negative bubble, it pushes the people away from you and the opportunity.
And I think negativity and positivity, it can ebb and flow, you know. I think it depends on what's going on in your life, what's going on in the world. We're exposed to things on a 24-hour news cycle that can really affect us, and seeing these images. Were you always so optimistic?
I think in my early 20s, I was quite pessimistic coming out of my youth, trying to find my foothold. Why April 23rd, 2006 is a day that I remember, the day that I decided to start making movies, is I started to feel a part of something for the first time in my life. Before that, I had skateboarded and thrown myself downstairs unrelentlessly and wasn't really too worried about my own physical health. Once I started making movies, I found myself. And actually, even more recent, once I really found my voice with these newer pictures, these poetic tales that I'm putting together, I suddenly feel more a part of something than I've ever felt. So being optimistic is a daily challenge. It's a choice. It's definitely a choice. For instance, somebody cuts you off on the street. You know, our first inclination is to be angry. But you could also tell yourself, what if that person's wife is pregnant, giving birth in the back seat, and they need to get someplace very quickly? We kind of decide to put this negative spin on things. And I think that's just the human condition. All of our minds go down that path. And it's up to us to try to navigate our own headspace to find a way to bring the optimistic side out in all situations. Honestly, earlier, a friend was really angry about this package not arriving on time because it had some medical instruments in it and they needed to go into a surgery. And this person came from San Diego to go to a surgery in Beverly Hills. It just happened this morning. And she was quite perplexed and upset. And then it came about an hour and a half late, and I tried to tell her immediately, it could have come at 3. The person's not even hardly behind schedule, and later on she got there was no chaos, nobody was upset, and she thanked me for trying to keep her in a positive place because it's so easy to spiral.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a useful side of that tale, because there's situations and everything. But I feel like any of us in the United States, right? There's so much war happening everywhere else right now. So much war. We feel so stuck by our own situations in life often. And if you just look a little bit to the left or right, you realize that really what we feel stressed about is going to pass. I love, one way that I stay optimistic actually, is I like to focus back on different moments in time where I was stressed about something different and realize that I had gotten through that, and that actually didn't rule my life any longer, that little stressful bubble. And then it makes me I come to this deep realization in that moment that this moment I'm feeling, I'm going to pass. I'm going to be on the other side of this stressful moment.
Sure. And the good passes too. I know
Yes.
there's a wanting to feel, sort of on cloud nine all the time. And as artists, we can ride sort of this roller coaster and thinking that, oh, this is never going to leave us and we're always going to feel great. And then when the down comes, it's even worse, because it's almost like, see, I knew life was going to fail me again.
Well, see, the thought of that right there, see, I knew that life was going to fail me, like that's the negative mindset. That's actually the mind driving us to this place, because the truth is that you shouldn't look for the good or the bad. Really, I think the life hack that I've learned is to-do lists, believe it or not. Like there's actually a side of just continuously progressing. That consistently keeps you feeling grateful. And it's like this to-do list. I have a to-do list every single day. And every time I check something off, it gives you a little tiny chemical reaction to the brain. And the truth is say you win a giant accolade in whatever your business is, right? That's fleeting. You're going to feel great that evening. By the next morning, you're going to be curious about why you feel down. And the reason you might feel down the morning after winning something is you had such a giant emotional outburst of energy that now your body's needing to recuperate and rekindle that energy. So we're not living for the really high moments, and we should not live for the very low moments, but understand that life is this roller coaster where you're consistently living somewhere in the middle is the happiest space you can live. And I swear to God, to-do lists take you to that place every day. It really does. It's just to check a couple things off and you're like, oh wow, hey, I'm succeeding today. I have a little Post-it note on my computer and it says, never have a 0% day. And that could be the smallest thing that you do. Coming here today, and then leaving after this, and okay, I did that today, and give yourself the leeway to not have to overperform. We live in this society that says you need to be working 8, 10-hour days. The billionaires work so often, and Elon Musk, these 60+ hour weeks, and that's not really gonna get somebody. I mean, say you get $1 million tomorrow, does that make you really happy? You might feel that feeling of relief that you have all this money in the bank for a couple of hours. And then you still are dealing with people that might get sick in your life or all kinds of factors. I think it's feeling content with who you are in the moment is the real challenge. And no matter where you are in life, that's always going to be the challenge. And so I always think back to yesterday and think, can I be better than I was yesterday? And then you have to be open to really critiquing yourself, really critiquing your life. Where could I have been more open-minded? Did I lose my temper? I'm not a religious person, but I have a Christian music radio channel on. And so if I start to feel this kind of burst of energy while driving, because in LA there's so much traffic and road rage is just on the side of us at all moments. It's just, we're so close to just always losing our cool. I'll just hit that channel because it's like, how can I be mad and start yelling at cars if I have this music on in the background? I'm not saying that necessarily helps, but I think it just goes to show that everything is a struggle and you're trying to navigate your way through it.
That's interesting. I used to listen to one too. I'm not religious either, and I wasn't raised religious, but there was one that had a call-in show, and it was so fascinating, and it was just to hear these different, people's problems, and I would also listen to one. So yeah, that's fascinating.
There's something calming in those channels because they don't take ad money from negative sources. So you don't get hit with commercials that might put weird thoughts in your head.
Sure.
So there's so much of that weird propaganda out there.
Do you think of yourself as an artist?
Honestly, I had this weird awakening recently and realized that I was a messenger and that filmmaking is a way to get messages out into the world. And I feel like a lot of people are artists. I feel like the word artist a lot of times is related to somebody who might be a painter or something of that sort, right? But I think it's really a broad term where we're all creative. There's creativity inside of us. I mean, even when you choose your outfit in the morning, you're being creative. But we don't see it as that because it's the normal thing we do every day. But I've realized that the movies that mean the most to me that I'm making now is when I've understood the message I'm hoping to relay to some degree. Again, I might not know exactly what that message is supposed to be, but it's a creative wave that's hit me and brought me down this spectrum of relaying whatever the message is supposed to be coming through that particular film. So I'm sure to the definition term of an artist, I am an artist. But man, it's such a weird term to call yourself because there's so much attached to that term. But I definitely see myself as a messenger and trying my best to tell whatever message I was supposed to tell. I'm incredibly aware of the fact that I'm not going to be around forever and that my time is finite. And I just keep thinking about my past work, my films, and when I make new films, where will they be in 100 years? And so I'm trying to tell these tales now that might be interesting to somebody 100 years from now, which is one reason why I'm shooting on celluloid opposed to shooting on digital sensors, is this idea that a negative, if preserved correctly, could outlive us by so much more time than hard drives. There's definitely something that's more long-lasting in a negative than the disk in a hard drive. So, yeah, I think it's not so much trying to be an artist or a filmmaker as it is understanding what the story is supposed to do to the human mind to some degree, because I do think there's a big sense of the creative process helps us learn what we're trying to tell. I think if you know every detail of what you're going to set out to make in the beginning, you lose some momentum. There's a moment when let's say you write a screenplay and you spend 8 months trying to get it off the ground, and then you get it off the ground, and then you shoot exactly what you wrote for those next 2 months, and then you go into the editing room. I think when people lose that momentum as filmmakers when they hit the editing room, it's because they're actually really kind of tired of the material that they set out to make. So it's how can you keep it fresh? Well, there's a lot of filmmakers who have figured out how to do that. Harmony Korine, Andrea Arnold, so many different amazing filmmakers out in the ether. I think one thing that Ben Rivers does throughout his films is he is just studying this creative wave. Now his films end up mostly in museums. Sometimes they end up in other places on streaming services. But it's my question and curiosity now is how can I take an art/museum type film that's really studying this creative wave and bring it more into the Hollywood landscape? And what does that marriage look like throughout those pieces?
Well, you're still so young, but you seem like you're an old soul. What has you thinking about death?
Well, in truth, about a year ago, I was sitting in my apartment and I heard this scream outside and realized that the scream sounded very familiar to me. I ran out front And it just so happened that my landlord, who was like my California mother, she had fallen unconscious and the scream was coming from her daughter. And in that particular moment, I had to pull her out from the car. We gave her CPR and she passed away. And that really made me question very heavily what I was making, why I was making it, why I'm from Ohio, why not be closer to my family? What am I doing out here? And, is it really to be this well-known filmmaker or get a lot of money or accolades, or where is it all coming from? And so I thought about leaving entirely and going back to Ohio and not necessarily stop making films, but go back there closer to family. And in the midst of that 6 to 8 month depression, because I was going up and down, and I actually started to take these bubble baths. And it was that mixed with the meditation that brought me into this place of comprehension of the types of films I want to make. I was in a bath at one moment and realized that my relationship with my mother was a bit disconnected. And I wanted to make a film series called My Flesh, My Blood, where I study the relationships with our mothers and hopefully mend something within my own relationship. And I figured that if I created these films that could fix something within myself, maybe then it would fix something in other people that might watch the piece. And I knew immediately that needed to be shot on film. We shot on Super 16 millimeter film. I shot that picture in a week. We had 55 minutes of film stock. The film turned out to be about 35 minutes. And now what I want to do is take that film series and travel around the world and try to make a film about a mother and a son or daughter and as many different cultures and backgrounds as possible before my time comes to an end. And maybe that film series becomes kind of a snapshot of mankind at a particular moment.
So the first film that you've done in that series, you had worked with the gentleman on prior films. He'd been part of your film.
Yeah, so that was Speed Ratliff, and he's one of the best boom operators I've ever came in contact with. He was a boom operator on the movie Saw. He worked on Jurassic Park. He did about 200 plus other films as this boom operator, and he is like the best in the business. Literally, when I first met Speed, he had read my screenplay for Clowning. That's where he first was working on with me. And he read the script 2, 3, 4 times. And so throughout the process of shooting that movie, when I thought about taking a line of dialogue out, I would pull him aside and say, hey, I'm thinking about removing this line. What do you think? What would it change in the future of the film? And he would literally be like, well, on page 62, that does alter that particular moment, and that might be a problem. And yeah, he became a best friend. We would talk all the time. So when I went through this tragedy, he was my first phone call, and we would just talk throughout the process. And when I came up with the idea for My Flesh, My Blood, he was also my first phone call, and he was like, well, Patrick, I take care of my mother. And then going to his house, which has a lot of history attached to it, and then right out his window in his apartment, you can see the observatory. And then I found out that his mother took these walks every day. Every day, this 89-year-old woman walks by herself up Hollywood Boulevard. And then through creating that first film with Speed, I suddenly realized so much about the rules that the other films will have to follow, which is finding subjects that are attached to the country's history to some degree through their lives, but also that are naturally around landmarks that have to do with that area. I never want to go to Egypt and arbitrarily film pyramids from a helicopter. I'd rather find people in Egypt that live near pyramids or even work around a pyramid and film it from their points of view. And so through making that first piece with Speed, and he's also going to be the boom operator in the whole series.
Oh, nice.
So it's kind of cool to, I hope the people that maybe fall in love with the series, that when they see Speed and meet his mother, that every time they watch an episode and see his name, it's like they feel comfort knowing that he's cultivating that audio. And him and I, me as a camera operator and him as a boom op, we've been dancing for years. So it was really, and through making that first film, because coming out of that depression I was faced with when my landlord passed away, watching him and his mother and Chuck watch the film, I saw that this isn't a film that's just important to me as a filmmaker. It's important to them. It'll be important to them and their family's family for decades. And then it gave me something to think about. Like, for instance, with the movie Devoted in Time I'm making with Rob Pryor, I'm really making it as a poetic letter to his family and his children. He has identical twin daughters who are 9. And so in my head, it's like, this is worthwhile making, because if in 10 years they love the movie, because it's about their family and the context of showing elements of their family and their daughters when they're 19, looking back at this little moment, it makes it feel like it's a lot more worth it than just a narrative piece that I'm... At one point when I was making films, it was like, oh, I just want to entertain. I just really want to get into, helping people find some relief from their everyday. And that's where that first nugget of me wanting to make films was coming from. But then really finding my voice was when I realized that this new journey of taking people's lives and turning them into poetry, there's such a poetic notion to that that feels really worth it and feels worth my time, which maybe I have 10 years left, or who knows how much time anybody has on the planet. So yeah, that really fills my cup now.
What was it about your California mother, who was your landlord? What was it that felt mothering about her?
Well, when I was living in San Francisco, and I would travel down maybe 3 or 4 times trying to find a place to live here in Los Angeles. And it's incredibly difficult to locate someplace to live. Most of the time, the buildings are owned by people that live in other parts of the world. And so you come in and they're like, well, do you have 3 months of rent up front? And your credit score needs to be through the roof. And also, do you have proof that you're already making money here in Los Angeles? That's something I had no idea I was going to run up against. This idea that you had to prove that income was coming in. And a lot of times they'd say that they wanted proof of 2 or 3 months of income coming in a month. And who moves here with that kind of ability right away? So anyways, I looked at all these different buildings and I came to her building, and she took me around the space and slowly found out that I was a writer and a filmmaker, and she started selling me on the property. She was like, I don't need to check your credit, we can figure out the deposit, here's a key, when can you move in? And it just felt so different. Now that's not exactly what the mothering side of her was. That was a friendly side, and I was so thankful for that. But then over the course of living there for 6 years, for one, she was an extreme lover of scary movies. And she would go see movies and come back, and we'd run into each other and talk. And during the pandemic, this is a perfect example. During the pandemic in Los Angeles, and maybe a lot of places around the country, I'm more aware of what happened here in Los Angeles on a personal level, but there was a lot of landlords just evicting people. She came to each of her tenants and said, I want you to not pay for 1 month's rent and save your money. And she allowed the people in the building to sustain life. And so, it just, when she had gotten diagnosed with lung cancer, and unfortunately I wasn't as present, because in my head I just, it was COVID time, so she needed to be away from everybody. But there were moments that I could have came to see her, and I just kept thinking things were just going to get better. I wasn't putting tons of thought into how things might spiral. So when she passed away and I was with her, thank God, I was so thankful that I was one of the people that was with her at the moment. But it was just a moment that you come through that kind of situation and you realize, like, wow, you know what? What I thought was so important isn't as important. And it turned out to be the most beautiful gift that, could have happened, that I was with her in that moment. But I'd be out skateboarding, she'd come running outside to watch. And it was like the closest relationship I've ever had with a landlord. And the building was in her family for a few generations before that. So there wasn't someone else you're dealing with. It was her and her daughter. And now her daughter Jackie's there, and she's amazing, and I'm so grateful to still be there. Yeah.
How has going through loss helped you find your creative voice?
Well, I feel that coming to the other side of a great loss in your life can help you appreciate the time that you have and appreciate every day a little bit differently. Living in Los Angeles, there's so many people go through this, and that is the city itself makes you feel like you're a part of this kind of machine where you're trying to be heard, you're trying to get this way or that way or meet this person, and you kind of lose track of time. Before you know it, months and months can go by, and what's really important is your family, your friends, interactions that you're having, living in the moment, not living for tomorrow's deal so going through a loss helped me understand how some of the films I wanted to make, they weren't really something I cared deeply about. I had made so many movies. In the very beginning of making films, I was really in love with filmmaking. I was in love with creating. That's why I had made so many movies in the beginning. So it was kind of like I learned how to make pictures based on learning how to use cameras and editing and directing and writing these stories, but I hadn't really solidified my creative voice. And so having gone through a loss and having to reassess why I want to take my time to make a particular thing led me to a place of understanding what images I love the most, how I love to work with particular individuals and sustaining their lives and creating this poetry. I always loved Ingmar Bergman and all the films that he had made, and there's such a poetry in them. And I feel like the poetic notion of filmmaking through Ingmar Bergman and Andrei Tarkovsky and certain great filmmakers from that time period, I feel like we're immersed in a lot of filmmaking that doesn't have as much of a poetic notion because it's trying to keep up a particular pace, trying to keep your attention. And I just don't think that we got to lose the idea that we're making things for today and for people today, because we're really, the things that we spend our time on, if we craft them with the notion of this is just about the people that are going to watch them tomorrow and not the people that are going to watch them 100 years from now. Because there's a lot of times I watch films of filmmakers I've never known existed, and they're from the 30s or 40s, and their film speaks to me in a particular way. But to circle back to the idea of loss, it's really, having gone through a loss helps you solidify what you should spend your time on. And I think a lot of people, and look, I think maybe the truth is, if you go through a loss and you're able to come out on the other side from that loss in a very positive manner, because maybe sometimes people don't come out on the other side. And maybe they go through a loss and find themselves incredibly lost within that depression or sadness. And so I think in a real true manner, I was very grateful to have gone through a loss and found myself on the other side of it in a positive way. And that helped me understand how to spend my time and what I wanted to spend my time on.
Wouldn't you say you've always been introspective? You said you've always been an artist, you've always maybe been a fish out of water back home, and that kind of caused you to want to make films and show a slice of life? I have
a really great example, actually, and that is I made a film called Everything Will Be Fine. It was my second feature film I shot back in Cincinnati, Ohio, and it follows a homeless couple, Alien and Lady, through the trials and tribulations of being homeless. And this is a spoiler, but about 20 or 25 minutes in, Lady gets kidnapped and Alien has to go and try to rescue her. So at that time, and this is a perfect example of how I found my voice today, at that time, I wanted to make this film with homeless people for two reasons. One very main reason at the moment was all the locations were going to be accessible. Because if they were able to live there, I could take a DSLR camera there and film a movie. And who's going to say something to me if people are, already living on the street in those moments? But the other reason was I saw a lot of homeless people around that I helped around Clifton. which is in Cincinnati, there are moments where I heard people give them nicknames, like Cancer Man, or these kind of horrible names to really dehumanize these people because they didn't want to feel badly about not helping them, not being there for them. So they would look at them differently and give them these names. That's why all the characters and Everything Will Be Fine have these nicknames. And the ending credits are all held by actual homeless people. And those are the only people in the whole movie who actually got paid $20 a piece, because I sold my whole DVD collection to get that money and be able to pay them. But the most beautiful moment of my filmmaking life thus far happened at a screening of that movie, where some woman came up to me. She was probably in her 50s, maybe 60s, and she asked me if I was the one who made the film, and she embraced me and cried on my shoulder for a minute and said thank you and left. And that moment was something I always said I was living for, but it wasn't until I had gone through a loss that I truly look back now and comprehend that I always wanted to tell stories about people on a very intimate level, and I always wanted to help humanize those who might not have a great voice or great platform to stand on, but I didn't know it then. It wasn't like something that kind of guided my ship towards where I should put that time and effort towards. So I do think I've always been introspective, but it wasn't until I had gone through a tragedy in my life that I truly found my actual voice and what helps guide me forward now.
But you considered moving home to Ohio, even though you've been in California, how many years?
For 8 years.
Even including San Francisco?
Yep.
Okay, 8 years. So how close did you come to actually moving? Were there plans, or it was just an idea?
It was an idea that turned into getting quotes from companies of packing up a truck and heading back there. But my large, I never had a backup plan with filmmaking. So I don't have some kind of degree to fall back on, or I don't have a resume built out to, like, literally my resume is just filmmaking. Like, I can go produce a live event from producing stuff in LA. But if I went back to Ohio, there's not a lot of jobs that I would qualify for. And then I realized a lot of times when you're even near your family, there's a lot of time you're not really around them. You still have to make time to be around them. And so through this venture of, am I going to move back to Ohio or am I going to stay here? There was a moment that I realized that, no, I just need to make more time to go back there and spend more time with family, but keep going on this journey, especially now that I realize making these films and helping people tell their stories means so much to me, and it's so fulfilling. To me, My Flesh, My Blood is a piece of selfless filmmaking, where when I made Clowning, you could almost look at that like a piece of selfish filmmaking to some degree, even though there is still an essence in it. And I'm not saying I love narrative films. I go see 3 movies every week in the movie theater. And I still want to make narrative films, but it kind of helps me understand what scripts I might want to spend time on and what tales they're telling. Where before there might be a moment that I want to make a scary movie because I'm excited about the magic trick of making that movie. The magic trick of the monster and all different kinds of elements. I don't know, I had to touch a little bit of tragedy to understand more about humanity and what is important maybe to sustain. Yeah. And then that led me to staying in LA. And I'm thankful for that because it's great weather in comparison.
Have you heard the advice, write every day?
I have heard that advice, and I do think it's really great advice because I believe when you hear writers of great stature saying that they write every single day. I believe Paul Thomas Anderson says that he writes every day, every morning. He needs to wake up really early, and that's kind of his time, because I think he's got 5 or 6 kids or something, and so he'll write every day. And I think Aaron Sorkin might be another writer that says that they write every single day. And I believe what they're really saying there is, and I believe this as well, is that you lose the momentum. Because it's hard. The hardest part of any creative endeavor that you're sitting at a computer, whether you're writing a screenplay or making a video game or any kind of element out there, is actually keeping your butt in the seat. And so if you get a habit of writing every single day, then generally you'll write through writer's block or write through this concept of thinking that it's not going to be good enough. Because really the most important element of writing every day is just getting a thing out there. Because once you have a rough draft, it's so much simpler to go back and craft it and, tweak it in particular ways. On a personal level, I think that people should handwrite their first draft. One, we lose our handwritten ability. And I do all this, I write so much longhand. And but another side of this is I think if you handwrite your entire first draft of a screenplay, then you have to write a second draft when you type it. But I have a whole style of writing where I'll do a paradigm, the note cards, and then go into a handwritten draft, and then go into a typing draft. And then generally speaking, it kind of gets you through that. But with that said, it's hard for people to get momentum. If you go from this desire of, oh, I wish I could write, and then you sit down for the first time to write and nothing comes out, well, of course, you have to work up the brain. You have to write every day. There has to be kind of a momentum building. And at some point, I can't remember what the number is exactly, but it's like if you do something 18 times or some particular number, it becomes a habit. So if you can sustain something doing it 18 days in a row, you'll feel weird to not do it. And they say that a lot about working out or those kind of habits, that eventually once you've gone so deep into it, you really don't want to stop doing it. So I think that's the big thing of writing every day, even if it's a couple sentences. I believe Stephen King also writes every day. I think that Joe Hill, Stephen King's son, writes every day, I believe. There's definitely a momentum. Something that Stephen King did with his kids, which it makes me so upset because I wish I could have had this in my childhood. They had a typewriter, and Stephen King and his wife, which I cannot remember her name right now, but she's a great novelist as well, they would write a sentence in that typewriter, and then throughout the week, Stephen King has a couple sons, they would all add sentences to it. And by the end of the week, they'd have a story.
Tabitha?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry. Okay.
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay.
And then so that was a game they played all through their childhood. Which come on, that's how you breed novelists.
Right. That's cool. Yeah. No. Now I'm jealous too. That's really neat. I wish I'd done that as well.
Yeah.
But you say you write to-do lists.
Yeah.
Do you handwrite those?
Oh yeah.
And at what point in the day are you doing as you wake up, or maybe you have a coffee, tea first, and then you do it?
Now that I have a nightly bubble bath, there's a moment where I'll put on meditation music and lay in the bath, and my mind will just kind of trail. Like I'm making a picture devoted in time right now, and in that film, I'm asking a lot of interview questions, and I'll come up with a lot of those questions while just trying not to even think about anything. They'll just start hitting me, and also my to-do list will come out that way as well. They'll just kind of. And I got in this routine of putting a to-do list together because it's so easy to forget things. You go into something with 8 objectives and you always forget the 8th or the 7th one. And if you write it all down, you never forget. They're all there. So yeah, and I'll write them in the morning if they're not written the night before, but I usually always write them the night before.
And do you find that not writing them on your phone helps you stay more present? Because I find I write grocery lists on a piece of scrap paper. Mm-hmm. I don't want my phone because it's going to distract me. And so when I go into a busy LA grocery store, now I just have this one thing to focus on, and it helps.
The only time I write anything on my phone is if I'm in that bubble bath and I have an idea, I'll write it into like a texting chat where I don't send it. But I just will jot them down that way because there's no paper next to the bathtub. And then later I'll handwrite them. And I also handwrite all my questions and all kinds of things. But one element to that is if you write stuff in your phone, like a lot of people have their calendars in their phone and stuff like that, all great technology. I am not anti-technology at all. But I love a hard calendar on the wall. And I love having those hard lists because I see it. And when I see that colorful piece of paper and see that, it reminds me immediately. If my phone is closed, also too, your phone gets you addicted to opening apps. It's just inevitable. I keep all the data off on all my apps on my phone. So if I'm not in Wi-Fi, I can't even open Instagram or other things. And that really helped me stop opening those apps every time you open your phone. So if you're like already have the habit that when you open your phone, you open Instagram or Facebook and your texting app, then you might forget to even open your to-do list. So, but say it's like a Post-it note on the back side of your phone, then you're always seeing it. Yeah, so I'll put them on my phone or on my wallet, or I have a very particular book that I carry with me. I'm always writing things longhand in my book. Yeah, so it's incredibly important, I think, to write things, for me on a personal level, write things longhand than putting them in a phone. There's apps for everything, and I think sometimes a lot of ideas get lost that way.
So in terms of writing every day, what about filming every day? Do you think there's the same urgency to keep sort of your eye behind the lens, or maybe not as much as writing?
Well, for me, the urgency comes from being attached to a creative wave. So given the fact that I'm producing, directing, writing, editing, shooting, doing sound design, I love sound design and mixing sounds and stuff on material. It's really being attached to that creative wave, because for me on a personal level, I couldn't be a novelist. And the reason is, if I sit down to write a screenplay, by the time I'm finished writing, I want to be around people so badly. And then I go out and start making the film. And then when I'm around people for the shoot, by the end of the shoot, I'm like, get me alone, you know? And then you get into the editing room, and then you're with your editor. And by the time you're done with that process, you want to be around people again, show the picture, and then the whole thing starts back over. So for me, it's not so much important to be writing every day as it is to be on that creative wave consistently and sustaining that. Because, you know, it's the little pieces, the little bites. I hate to say bites out of the apple because it makes me think of the Garden of Eden, and that was a negative thing, to eat the apple. But truly, you are taking bites out of an apple every day. And just, it's like if you do a little bit every single day, it's why I have that post on my computer that says never have a 0% day, because as long as you do 1% of work today, in a year, if you keep doing that, you'll probably have done more work than a lot of people end up achieving, because it's so easy to not do anything for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And it just gets, you know, especially because we have Netflix and so much possible entertainment that's sitting there. As a filmmaker, I love and I don't love Netflix. There's like a side of it where I'm afraid to put stuff on platforms where your stuff gets buried. And it's so consistent, just so much out there. But also I feel like filmmakers, you shouldn't be even thinking about that side of it. Because again, just be caught up in the creative wave, make as much as you can, put it out in the world, and let everything else work itself out.
What happens when that wave, you don't catch it?
Well, fortunately for myself, there hasn't been a moment I don't catch the wave. I think it's because I came from such a difficult childhood that once that moment came where I decided to devote myself towards filmmaking, I had a purpose. And before that, I was skateboarding, and I would go outside for 8 to 10 hours and just kill myself to try to figure out new skateboarding tricks. And that transitioned over to filmmaking. So I've made so many films at this point in my life because I've consistently not gotten off that wave. And I do think that it's like working out. If you do push-ups every day, eventually you can do 100 push-ups a day. But so like the idea of getting ideas, if you're open to it and keep on pushing that flow forward, eventually they'll keep coming faster and faster and faster. I think there's so much in the universe that we don't comprehend. Like for instance, dark matter. There was a moment that we didn't think it existed, and now we know that it exists. And I think that there could be a possibility that our energy can interact with that dark matter and bring things to us. But I think the ability to bring things to yourself comes from how clear your antenna is. And that's being sober. That's, you know, not just being sober from drugs or alcohol, but being sober from negativity. You know, it's really keeping your head clear and on the right track. And I think that's when things just start to accumulate and pop up.
Right, that's a great point. And also, too, the images online, it's easy to get caught up, whether it's social media, the news feed.
Tony Robbins said something the other day that I saw, and he said, he told a gentleman to look around a room and then close your eye, or look around the room and look at everything that's green. And the guy closed his eyes and he said, "Do you see all the green items?" And he said, "Yes." And he said, "Can you think of the items that are red?" And he's like, "No." And he said, "Okay, open your eyes. Now look around the room and look for all the items that are red." And he closed his eyes and he asked him a similar question. And the point is that we look for what we're looking for. So if you're looking for negativity, if you're hyper-focused on the negative, you're going to find it everywhere. If you train yourself to be focused on positivity, you will find it all over the place. There is always a way to spiral things into a positive route, even more so than negative. But I think our society's kind of built towards people being in a negative headspace. And it might just be that there's this sexy notion of violence and all kinds, sex and violence and how that's intertwined in entertainment. Maybe there's just this kind of spiral towards negativity, but I feel like if you can train yourself to the positive side of life, then you'll find that wherever you look, and it'll, give you a clearer mind, I think.
Yeah, and I think also, too, there's a popularity in cynicism. So sometimes if you're too Pollyanna, in my case, or whatever, and not that I've always been that, but then you're going to be made fun of, because if you're in more of a heady environment where there's more of these realists, whatever, working in certain corporations or law firm or whatever, there's a cynicism there. So it doesn't fit in to be upbeat and cheery, because the stuff that's coming to you through that job is usually someone's got a problem and they need it solved. So, I think that cynicism, is sort of popular.
It might be popular because of what we're built on. If you think about mankind over the course of history, it's all war. It's taking over land, the poor and the rich. That's always been the way it's been. And so that's such a pessimistic way of life where, I don't have answers for where we are, but it's very obvious that if we all lived in a very positive manner, then there would be a possibility that we'd be more positive. Where does negativity come from in today's world? Usually, to a large degree, if somebody's feeling down, it's probably because subconsciously they feel like someone else has something that they would like to have. But really, if they knew the person that had the thing that they wish they had, they'd realize that that person actually wishes they had this other thing. And that there's this whole circular nature to us feeling like we wish we had more and not feeling. And that's where Buddhists, I believe, and I'm not incredibly well read in Buddhism, but I believe a large part of that is feeling content in who you are in the exact moment you're living and trying not to desire so many other things outside of what you're sitting with.
And that's difficult, especially when you pick up the phone. You're going to be bombarded with images that
yeah. And also, too, we all have family and friends. And everyone has pessimistic family and friends. I think it's incredibly important to not push yourself into the arena of trying to help people change. Only focus on yourself. You cannot allow yourself to be too focused on, I wish my aunt would be this way or see that, or my uncle or my father or my mother or my brother. It's got to be focus on yourself, get your head in the right space, and that's all that matters. And let people live the way they want to live.
Let me just play the devil's advocate, though.
Okay.
What if someone says, PM, that's being a dreamer.
Yeah.
Money talks, and we all have to pay bills.
Yeah.
We need to look at reality.
There's a large part that reality is what you choose it to be. And if you allow the reality that you live within to be chosen by someone else, then you'll never feel happy. For instance, you're a child, so you kind of live within your parents' reality. whatever that reality is. When you become an adult, a lot of times we're not taught to realize that now we're formulating our own reality. And part of formulating your own reality is not necessarily to see a therapist, but to comprehend that we all need work. I need work right now. There is no person who would not be in a place of needing to be in a better position emotionally. So I do think that it's easy to write off an idea that you can spin everything into an optimistic manner, but it's not easy to write off that that does make you feel better. You know, it feels better to not focus on the negative. And I do want to say it's incredibly important to understand that this is a daily challenge that I put myself through. It's not like I wake up and I'm like, oh, everything's great. And it's like you wake up and you're like, okay, how can I get back centered right now? How can I get back to this moment? And then your mind spirals out and you got to focus on bringing it back and getting back to the place. And filmmaking helps balance me. And this new filmmaking where I'm taking documentary and narrative and marrying the two genres, there's a side of that notion where doing interviews and certain things help me get into a meditative place where I have to be centered. Because a lot of times when you're interviewing someone, you're forcing yourself to stay quiet and trying to stay in the moment and be there. And I feel like that's something I love so much about these new movies is being in that moment and just having to listen. And it helps clear your mind when you really live in the moment with somebody. And we don't do it very often. Outside of interviewing somebody, how often do you really just sit and listen, even to the people that we love? We're always our minds are kind of trailing off. Oh yeah, I'll listen to you for a moment. Shoot, I need to do this thing. But when you're interviewing somebody for a movie or whatever you're interviewing them for, even for a job, right? Like a job interview, if you're hiring somebody, you're sitting there with that person for 30 or 40 minutes, if they're lucky. Maybe it's a 10 minutes and they're out the door situation. But for 30 or 40 minutes, and for the moment, you're just with that person. And if you're disconnected, then you're kind of losing at life because you're also disconnected from the time you're living. But, it's a daily struggle to find that positive spirit within us, but that is, I think, the human condition and something we all are dealing with. And that's the universality of being alive.
If you were interested in storytelling, you may also like our new book, Story Questions, the sponsor of today's video. It's a story tool that offers you over 1,500 story questions that you can use as story prompts. It's packed with over 40 categories, so whether you are in the brainstorming stages, developing characters, dialogue, or rewriting, it can help you at every stage of the writing process. Think about this statement. Most powerful stories are just great answers to strong questions. We've linked up to story questions in the information section below. Now back to the interview. We had this comment come in on our channel, and that is, the only way to become a filmmaker is to make friends with rich people. What's your reaction to this?
Depends on what filmmaker you want to be. If your goal is to make movies with millions of dollars, you're probably not going to make a very good movie. I mean, look at how many movies come out for millions of dollars and there's no soul behind them, no comprehension of it. It can be an incredibly expensive art form. There can be a side of it that is really a high amount of money that needs to be spent, but also you can make a lot of films for no money. Look at, what's that film? Shoot, the one that came out with Shudder, Skinamarink. That movie was made for almost nothing, and then suddenly it went on this giant, theatrical run. I feel like if you start to, I have a lot of friends who have wanted to make films and never went out to actually do it because they have this great idea and they're like, it's going to cost $5 million. And I say, well, hold on a minute. Why do you think it's going to be $5 million? You've never even budgeted a movie before. Why did you attach this price point? And I started to realize that a lot of people attach price points to stuff that cause them to not be able to do it. And I think filmmaking in a large respect is about overcoming obstacles. and financial sides of filmmaking are just obstacles. So don't create an obstacle before you really start the process. And then also, I am a huge believer in the idea of just keep showing up. I relentlessly just kept showing up to every movie I've ever made. Like, for instance, Devoted in Time, this new film I'm doing with the painter Rob Pryor. We're shooting the whole thing on the Bolex 16mm film. And that film, for the first month, there was no money involved. I wasn't able to shoot any film yet. And I showed up every day to the studio and did audio interviews. Every single day, I just kept going back and going back and going back. And eventually it just kind of snapped together. A donor put some money into the picture who doesn't even own any points on it because they said they had a dream and realized that this needed to be made. And my producing partner, Drew Harwood, he was able to bring that money to the table, and we got all the film stock. The fridge is chock full of film now, and we've shot over an hour of material on the Bolex. And that goes back to the whole financial side. It's you know, don't create limitation before you go out to bat. You know, go out there and try to hit the ball as best you can, and you never know. Swing away, and it might hit it over the fence.
Here's another quote. We don't want to be poor, but we don't want to sell out.
Well, when I was making Clowning, I was offered $250,000 to not use my best friend as the lead in the movie, and I turned down that money and got the investors to, well, I actually got the executive producer to go out and find other investors to bring in actually less money, but enough to make the movie, and was able to make the movie with my friend. And a huge facet to that, and why I bring that up in a quick manner, because it's a very large story. But the reason I bring that up is if I would have replaced him and made that movie with a different actor, it probably could have landed that movie with a bigger company as a distributor, could have gotten a theatrical release maybe, perhaps, depending on the individual involved. But I had such a beautiful experience with this person who I had been making movies with back in Ohio before I moved to Hollywood and was able to make that first movie. And I would never take that back in a million years. And I didn't make any money off of making that movie, actually, when I went out to do it. I waived all those fees and put all the money in front of the camera as I could. But I learned so much from making that movie that now I know so much more about working with crews and production designers and things that I might not have really known to that degree. So, you know, is there a way that you can sell out making movies in Hollywood? It's obviously a possibility. Who wouldn't want to make the Marvel movie? Who wouldn't want to make the movie for Disney? I wouldn't look down on anyone's choices. I think we all decide to go a particular direction in making movies and taking money. But I think you might learn less about yourself if you take the easy route. Take the hard route and maybe more is revealed within you. And if you take the easy route, maybe you don't get as much on a personal level, perhaps.
Okay, well, just to play the opposite, so what if someone says, you know what, I don't need to learn anything more about myself. I need a nice car, I need to pay my bills, I want to take my significant other out to nice meals, and I want to be paid for my time.
Well, I would say that individual is probably not going to be a close friend of mine. More than likely, I would have to say that in life, something that's incredibly important is what you're doing every day, right? And if its sole purpose is for money, well, all your money could be gone like this. You know, a very intelligent individual once said to me, you can't judge somebody based on their money or their weight, because it fluctuates the rest of your life. And that's incredibly true. You know, you could have, I mean, look at all the celebrities who have had millions and then they've gone bankrupt, you know, decades later. And I think it just goes to show that, and also how many celebrities or wealthy individuals are super depressed. You know, I mean, so I do feel pretty strongly that your goal probably, no matter what your background is, whether you want to make movies or be a Wall Street banker, honestly, if it's about objects for you, you're gonna be a little lost, I think, emotionally. And inevitably, I love a lot of things, you know. I mean, it's not like I don't appreciate, you know, I like having a rougher car though, because sometimes, you know, you get in your car, your door's open, and then like the car goes down some when someone else gets in, and it hits the curb, and you hear it go as they shut the door. I never have an emotional reaction to that. I'm like, no big deal. And I kind of like that, you know, someone hits my car a little. I have this one thing where somebody hit the side of my car and they didn't have insurance, so they gave me a couple $1,000, and I actually didn't have money for rent the next month, so they paid for my rent and had no idea. I was so grateful. And then nowadays, I look at that little bit of damage, and I'm like, you know, if someone came up to me and they're like, I'll give you $2,000 to let me hit your car, I'd let them do it. I mean, that's such little damage. So more possessions, I think, causes us to put more emotional instability towards things that might not matter. And you're probably losing something in your life. But I mean, look, everything's easier said than done. You know, say you grew up in a household where parents, their sole thoughts were on possessions. Maybe it's kind of ingrained in your DNA to care so much. And I mean, one thing that really frightens me is the fact that Instagram and these social media outlets cause children to be so hyper aware of the way that they look. And that's frightening, because now there's new disorders that are happening where some kids will post what they're wearing before they go to school, and if they don't get a certain number of likes, they don't want to leave to go to school.
Oh, wow.
And so I feel like we're in this kind of weird place where we have to comprehend how to deal with these new situations we're putting ourselves in the middle of. You know, so everything's easier said than done, and there's no reason to look down on anybody's choices. But it is incredibly important to realize that the 5 people that you keep in your life, your 5 main people, end up being a facet of who you are. So if you're really disinterested in possessions, then make sure the people you keep around you probably aren't the most possessive types. Yeah.
What's your thought that your art may never give you the money and the lifestyle that you want?
Well, I feel like if you're really creating art from within yourself, that itself will cultivate a particular lifestyle. I don't think you should be motivated by trying to use your art to make money, because you may be let down. First, create art, find your voice. Why are you making things? Allow that to catapult you forward. And if you do that, and you do it selflessly enough and consistently keep creating, I do think you end up being seen. We have this kind of notion today where we all want to be seen in such a, so badly. We want to be seen. And if you focus on that element, your art will probably fall to the wayside, because there's essence. There's something so beautiful that we're all attached to each other, that we're all from this similar universe, that we're all living beings right here. And like, look at Bob Dylan in the beginning of his career. He was creating this music and he was writing these things that he says he has no idea how he wrote them. But maybe at that moment he was so clear, his antenna was so wide open for these messages to hit him, that he facilitated it and he put it out into the ether. And through creating that, it turned him into the artist that he was. So I create these films, and inevitably I'm sure that they've punctuated my life in particular ways that I probably can't even fully comprehend how it's shifted me in certain avenues. But there's definitely a side of this that you can't create your art in the hopes that it becomes your career, because I believe thoroughly that if you focus too heavily on that, then it'll maybe stifle what you're even creating. Because that's a scary thought, the idea of this has got to pay for everything. Well, we all have to pay rent, right? We all have to pay bills. But if you start creating and immediately want that to catapult into some kind of quick money, you won't really have gotten to the place of having a voice or even understanding how you can portray your voice or how you can get into people's heads. You know, a lot of times people nowadays kids say they want to be influencers. What does that even mean? You know, a large facet here is we've got all these people with 1 million followers, right? So they feel famous, but they're not. Who knows who they are? Very few people knows who most of these people are. And I have a friend in the recording industry where they'll take a new artist, they'll buy them 2 million subscribers, and then that 2 million subscribers, well, that'll fall away over time. But what happens is there's this crazy thing that takes place where when people see they have 2 million followers, they'll start following them. So the 2 million will dial back to about 600,000 or so, and that'll be real followers. And it's that people actually started to believe this person was well known. And then even with those 600,000 people, who are they? There's billions of people on the planet, so that's not real fame. How back in the day, Tom Cruise, you know, in the 90s when he was famous, well, he was famous all over the world. Michael Jackson, that's fame. You know, just to say like some real definitive names that I'm sure are known all over the place, all over the planet. But now we live in this world where having 200,000 followers on Instagram is giving people some kind of feeling of, oh, I've done it. I'm where I'm supposed to be. And it's like, no, that's a lost sensation. I fear Instagram disappearing for those people. You know, where would they find their worth in all of it? So to create art and have that initially get you to a particular place is a beautiful side effect to doing it selflessly.
PM, can you show us what you have there and what's the story behind this?
Yeah, so this right here is my favorite camera of all time. It's the Bolex 16 millimeter camera. And when I first was introduced to this camera, I was in San Francisco at the film school where I was helping students understand how to do some 16 millimeter film editing.
That's beautiful.
And it's steel and leather from 1962.
Wow.
It takes 100-foot rolls of 16 millimeter film. So you're actually loading this film, and I'm really excited about this because it's really a box of magic tricks. Like there's a lot of film cameras out there, but not a lot that has the capability of doing, you can rewind the film and double expose it, quadruple expose it. You can do single frames. You can actually do lock it down and have it do a continuous shot. It can do 12 frames up to 64 frames a second with this little twist here, going to 64 frames or all the way down to 12. And you keep it on 18 because 18, the number is actually in red, and that's what you load the film with. And you actually wind it up. So it's a wind-up camera. That's there.
Where are you buying the film?
So the film, right there's the sound it makes.
Oh, that's pretty.
So that's at 18 frames a second. And there's a limitation there because you can actually hear the sound, right? So they say it's not a sync sound camera. Every time you reopen it, the counter goes back to 0. But a really beautiful side of this, here actually, we'll move this back a little bit here. A really beautiful side of this is the lenses. I love that there's this turret on the front of it that you can put 3 different lenses and have them going. So when I do a light reading, what I'll generally do is I'll set the f-stop on all 3 of my lenses at the same time. And we'll hook these up real quick here. But I have a 50 millimeter, a 25, and a 10. And my 50 millimeter lens, this very rare lens here, has the capability of doing macro. So you can do macro close-ups with it, which just gives me the ability to film a close-up of a penny or a human eye. A lot of lenses, the they have to be around 2 or 3 feet away from an object to find focus, where this could be around 3 or 4 inches from it, around about, maybe a little bit less than that. Let's see. And then we'll put the 10 millimeter on the bottom, because obviously if this was too close to the 25 or the 50, you'd actually have some of it in the frame.
Wow. Had you learned how to use it before you purchased it, or no?
Yeah, so I spent some time at this film school. It was like my backdoor in, working in this film lab for a little bit in the Academy of Art in San Francisco downtown. And I was able to film with a Bolex while I was up there for a little bit of time. Here's the actual, whichever lens is at that middle portion is what you're actually shooting with. This is a 25 millimeter. So let's see here. So no, I had never, living in Ohio, I never shot film before. When I went to San Francisco, I had my introduction to this Bolex camera and just fell madly in love with it. Because when I thought about making films back in Ohio, I always thought it had to be something so much larger. And this is so handheld, and to have the ability to be able to change to any of these different lenses.
Oh, wow, it moves in.
So it can be 50 millimeter, or I've got a 25 millimeter, or you have your 10. And because you're shooting on film, those millimeters actually double, because it's 16 millimeter film. So a 10 would be the equivalent of 20 millimeter, 25 would be the equivalent of a 50 millimeter, 50 would be the equivalent of 100. And it creates a beautiful image. It's a 27-second exposure at 24 frames a second. And you can only load a 100-foot roll of film in this. And 100 feet translates to about 3 minutes of filming time. And I love that limitation. It's a big facet to my creative process now, is shooting on film and having that limitation built into it. Because of making films for the past, 18 years, there's been a side of this that I understand now. Krzysztof Kieslowski said something that was incredibly important to me, and that was, it's not so important where you place the camera, but why you place it where you place it. And that's a thought that I've thought quite a bit about over time, and wondering, what he means by that. And then suddenly, on a theoretical standpoint, you start to comprehend how you can get into different positions in the human mind based on where you place the camera. So shooting on film, you have to be really specific what you're going to shoot. You can't just shoot coverage of everything. And I really love that. I love the idea of walking into a space and saying, all right, we got 3 minutes of shooting time. Let's shoot these shots. And you know what? Looking through this little viewfinder, it's pretty difficult to find your focus. It takes a little bit of figuring it out within yourself. But once you have it dialed in, you'd be hard pressed to find something that looks more beautiful than 16 millimeter being shot on a Bolex. There's something about that spring wound nature of pulling the film through the gate that gives it a whole different spin than anything that could happen. You shoot digital video and you can try to put film, what are they called? Film little overlays to be able to see film grain and stuff digitally on your footage. But to have film really being pulled through this gate on these reels, there's nothing digitally yet that can show what that looks like.
And where is the sound?
Yeah. So there's no sound.
Okay, no sound.
You would be recording sound separately.
Okay.
And then syncing later.
And what is compatible? Would modern things wouldn't be compatible? No modern like H6 or something.
Actually, no. You can record sound, if anything, digitally. Because a lot of times what I'll do is I'll shoot on film and then I'll have it digitized. And then I'll edit on my computer.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, and then sometimes I'm doing some longhand editing, depending on what the project is. I would love to do a narrative film that I actually cut longhand so you can see the tape splicing, and then digitize it and add audio. So the thing with this is you could hear the sound of it a moment ago, so you can hear that within your shots. So if I was filming an interview of you, and then you would hear part of the camera. But I planned for that with Devoted in Time, the film I'm making, the new feature-length film that I'm shooting entirely on the Bolex. We plan to hear the camera at times. And then there'll be sequences where you don't hear the camera, where we completely recreate the sound design in post.
How many of these are left in the world?
There's still a company in Switzerland you could buy a brand new one for quite a bit. There's definitely a higher price point to purchasing a brand new one of these, but there are a number of them. I mean, if you really go out and search for a Bolex, you can end up finding one somewhere. So I don't know, there could be hundreds out there. It's really hard to put a number on, to be honest with you, but it's not easy to find one in great condition. That's a big facet of it. I was lucky enough to find an individual in New York who refurbishes Bolexes and lenses. So everything that I have is recrafted. And this glass, there's a gold tint to the glass that's not like digital lenses. That there's this real, it's old glass. There's nothing like it. You can't even use regular lens cleaner without damaging what's there already.
How do you clean it?
Luckily, I haven't had to clean it at this moment. But it's something I have to figure out, the best way to clean this old glass in the future.
Sure.
Yeah.
Is there like a Facebook group or a community of these Bolex owners?
There's definitely a lot of, there's a producing partner of mine, Alyssa Bolzay, who made a film called Beyond the Bolex. Her great-grandfather was the inventor of the Bolex, and she's connected to a whole lot of different groups of individuals shooting on this camera. Now, it's more known in the narrative or in the experimental community. And then within the experimental community, this is a much more utilized tool. But Mark Jenkins just made the movie NS Men and Bait with this camera, a narrative feature-length film shot entirely on a clockwork wind-up camera. And now I'm venturing into making feature-length films on the same camera. And I do believe that the fact that you're shooting on film, you can really, there's no limitations to this. I mean, it's really a beautiful artistic tool. When you're talking about a beautiful paintbrush, because to me, a camera body is like a paintbrush. Each individual lens is like a different color, and then whatever layer that you would put on top of that, for instance, like a filter or something, is almost like you're mixing colors. So it's really like, to me, one of the best paintbrushes I can possibly utilize.
And what's the story behind purchasing this? You were living in San Francisco.
Yeah, I was living in San Francisco. My rent there, because I was sharing an apartment with somebody, and my rent there was about $970 a piece. And it was a little studio apartment. I had just moved there. I was on a bunk bed. I had gotten a job working in the film school, where to me it was like my back door in to actually being in that environment. And I started shooting with their Bolex. And then slowly over time, I realized that this was my favorite camera. I found one for sale, and I literally gave up a month's rent to purchase the body, and the 10mm lens is what came for $900. Now this body goes for over $3,000 because it's rare. It's harder to find certain models out there. But yeah, I had to work. At one point I was working at the film school, Starbucks, and dog walking. So I worked 7 days a week for a period of time. So making Devoted in Time is such an important movie for me on another aspect too, because I went broke buying this camera. So now getting to make at least one, feature film with it, it's like, oh, I keep thinking to myself, get on the other side of that, and it was so worth that, emotional disturbance of going through those difficult times. And now looking up how expensive this model is luckily it was only $900. I'm almost kicking myself you can get a 10 times viewfinder or a 13 times, and that just means how much light is going through. This is a 10 times viewfinder. If I would have spent another $100 or $200, I would have gotten the 13 times viewfinder. And so I'm kind of kicking myself that I didn't go even more broke, but what are you going to do?
Well, it makes you appreciate the fact that, when you do make the film, or other things that you've shot, just all the sort of pain and sacrifice that was worth it. Did people tell you were crazy, like don't do it, don't spend your money on it? Or did you not tell anybody, you just went ahead and bought it?
Oh, I just bought it. Yeah. I'm the kind of guy that if I get something in my head, I just do it. If you're asking people their advice, most people are coming from a safe background, But I usually don't. I mean, there's so many moments in my life where my money goes to below zero. And it's like getting comfortable in that zone. I think that's where an artist, probably thrives. So yeah, when I wanted to get this, it was like, screw it, I'm gonna get it.
So you bought it, and now have other people reached out to you with questions? Have you ever, helped anybody who's thinking of buying one?
I've had a couple of people recently ask me a couple of things about it, but I think as Devoted in Time comes out and we have even a larger conversation around the Bolex, I think there'll probably be a lot more questions. I know Alyssa, through introducing her film out into the world beyond the Bolex, that she got quite a few people. I mean, you got Wim Wenders, Steven Spielberg, a whole lot of people started their careers on this camera, making short films, learning how to shoot. So it's a beautiful tool. Again, there's not a lot of film cameras out there you can actually rewind the film and shoot again. There's a filmmaker named Jerome Hyler. He's an experimental filmmaker, and his work is ridiculously beautiful. If you have a chance to check it out, it's usually playing at a museum. What he'll do is he'll shoot a roll and he'll rewind the whole roll and he'll shoot it over and over for a month or two. And then he'll process the film and you have these beautiful exposures with all kinds of images laying on top of each other. And then he creates these experimental pieces. So there's not a lot of film cameras that have that capability to be able to shoot all those different, they call this the Swiss Army knife of film cameras. It was the first camera created to be able to shoot in all the different poles on the planet. So you can take this to any kind of conditions, and generally the screen might, your 24 frames a second might vary a little bit depending on the climate, but it'll always work. There's even a story I heard about a gentleman dropping this camera in a river. He waded over to the side because all of his luggage, everything toppled over on this raft, and he waded over to the side of the river and marked it. And then he came back 3 months later when the river was lower, waded around and found it.
Oh, wow.
Dried it out, worked fine. And then his son, who was older when he was telling the story, this is actually in the Beyond the Bolex documentary, he had that camera that he had shot with too, that he was telling the story about. So these things, they're literally made with some of the best parts out there. And nowadays we have these digital cameras that are made out of, who knows what, that's almost meant to break. But this was a time period where they made things to last.
So had you seen Beyond the Bolex? That was, 2011 that it came out, or 2013?
I can't quite recall what year that officially came out. I know that she's still working with distributors and it's getting re-released. I don't think it came out in, I'm not sure what year, to be quite frank with you.
So you saw it afterwards. You saw Beyond the Bolex after you purchased your Bolex.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
I got my Bolex 8 years ago. I watched Beyond the Bolex maybe a year and some change ago for the first time. I couldn't find it I'd come across a card at Pro 8mm in Burbank. I get all my film from Spectra and do all my processing at Spectra. But I was in Pro 8 and came across their card for Beyond the Bolex. And I was like, okay, I love this camera. I want to find this movie. And then the movie itself, it's a beautiful tale. And her great-grandfather who created the Bolex, it really talks about his whole life and tells the story of, where he came up with this, where, he ventured afterwards. And she didn't have any idea that this was in her family at the time. Yeah, she came across it when she was in film school, and then slowly made the film over the course of around 10 years or so, making this movie and learning more about Jacques.
She had a good crowdfunding campaign, correct?
I think that over the course of her time making the film, there was maybe a couple moments where she was raising money. She had to travel the world to talk to so many different people about the camera and their backgrounds with it. So yeah, it was a big journey for her to build that film. And I'm so thankful that she's a producing partner on Devoted in Time. You know, one, she's a great filmmaker, great mind to bounce stuff off of, and then two, her having that family history tied to the camera is really quite exciting, just to be making a feature with her, with this picture. And then when we film in the future with the space shuttle launch, we're going to shoot it with 5 different Bolexes, and one of them is going to be Jacques from the 20s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she has 2 of his cameras, one that he shot with and one that's never been filmed with. So, and his only takes 50-foot rolls, so that's like a minute and a half of material. So you have to be really specific about who's filming when. But I'm excited at the idea of having like a line of 5 Bolexes all shooting with all different film stocks, black and white, Ektachrome, color negative. Honestly, I'm almost like a kid with this camera. When I'm like shooting Devoted in Time, like the people that I'm working with are like, they just see me just staring at it. But
It's beautiful.
It really is. I mean, there's
Beautiful.
really nothing like it.
Yeah.
It's heavier than what you think it is. And then these lenses, I mean, they're just so beautiful. And also, shooting on this 16 millimeter, you think it's 4.3, but when you actually look at the gate as its entirety, it's not 4.3, this square image. It's almost 1.661, this European width of wide. So it's not super 16 millimeter film, but it's just below it. So it's still a rectangle. And that's something I'm really, really falling in love with.
So forgive me, how does it become digitized?
Yeah.
Because you're using actual film stock.
Yep.
How are you converting it?
So Spectra is the lab that we're working with on this picture. But most labs are equipped this way. You shoot film, you send it to them to be processed, and then they'll digitize it. So they take the negative and they put it through this machine that takes pictures of every individual frame. So we get it digitized at 4K. And then you're able to take that film stock. And some people have asked the question, well, you're still working with digital material, but the fact is that usually when you're shooting with a digital camera and you're filming, let's say, a television, there's like a flicker. Well, on this, there's not, because it's photographs. It's 24 photographs a second. So you're getting individual pictures. So there's such an element to shooting on film. Digital can be beautiful. But what you get right out of the box of filming is almost like you're almost with a finished image. You just got to tweak little bits of color. And a lot of times with digital, when you get to post, you got to do a lot more work to get there. But there's something too with the limitation, the 3 minutes a roll that end up being quite a beautiful thing to work with. And also like, I have an idea of shooting this particular scene. I have 3 minutes of film to shoot it with. That limitation will cause you to almost take more time to compose every shot, to check your focus every single time. So an uncut roll kind of almost looks like a little experimental film on its own. Yeah.
But you also have an editing table at your home where you do splicing?
I do.
Okay.
I do. Well, when I was making films in Ohio, I always dreamed of being able to project actual celluloid. So I have a big movie theater screen in my house, and then I have a 16 millimeter projector, and I'll explore experimental film and editing images together. For one, when I bring people to my house and I show them films and project for them, they're always like, whoa, this looks unbelievable, because you're seeing the raw film right in front of your face. And our televisions, a lot of times we're watching Netflix, let's say through an Apple TV, and your Wi-Fi might go out a little bit, so your quality of the image goes down, but you don't, general people don't notice, but we're losing a lot of quality. So when you go back to just projecting film, there's something so beautiful about it. So I like to remind myself in what we're doing, and that's such a great way to do it. And also too, there's no blue light. So how you're looking at a computer screen and it's keeping you up at night with blue light, when you're working with a light table and you're editing longhand and then you're projecting, there's no blue light that you're actually taking in. So it's become an end of the night kind of activity for me.
Okay. So you don't even need like a screen to block the blue light. You can, because there's nothing there.
No, it's just a light bulb.
Interesting.
Yeah, so there's not really, I mean, there might be some kind of blue light there, but it's not anything like a television or a computer or, something of that sort.
Your movie Clowning PM has been in the marketplace for about 2 years or so. Can you tell us the story of the release?
Yeah, we finished the picture, we went into COVID. So then we had to go in and actually do all the editing and painstakingly figure out how to finish the piece over the course of COVID. So getting into 2022 with a finished movie, it was a difficult situation because one of our executive producers, he had changed his career during that time. And it was going to be, he was going to be the individual to really get the picture out there based off of past work that he's pushed into the ether. And I believe he tried to push it out as best as he could, probably given his time restraints with the new career even. I and my producing partner went off and we found Gravitas Ventures and we began to put this deal together with them to put the movie out. And for a first-time filmmaker, whether or not it's a big release or a small release, getting something put out, I can tell you right now, for sure is by far more important than any money. The first film is a fishing pole, not a fish. Like truly beyond the most important facet was if you Google clowning movie and you see all the different places it's out there to watch, I can't even tell you the amount of future film financiers who have paid for other work of mine who has never even watched the movie. And they just Google it and they're like, oh, it's been sold. Okay, cool. He's done something. And it's almost like that first film, it really is that final gate that you have to climb over to be able to keep making future work. So the release was quite intriguing because working with Gravitas Ventures, you know, they're a great company. And I know that there are filmmakers out there who feel a bit differently about that fact. But when we worked with them, they're very transparent about how you have to do the marketing as a filmmaker. That they're going to put your picture out, and I'm so grateful to the work that they've done. And then it really is on the filmmakers to get the word of mouth out into the ether and get people to watch the films. Now, it's early on for me with working with Gravitas and releasing that picture. So I don't, we're still going through different quarters of release and figuring out the financial side of things, but everything seems to be a very positive experience thus far. But again, I know I've met filmmakers who are disappointed by releasing their first movie. And I think a lot of times people expect that they're going to release a movie and then they're going to get like $1 million check or a studio is going to give them a call. But that's not the way it is. The way it is truly is that you have to find your audience. You got to push out your movie yourself. Even if you're using a bigger distributor. A friend of mine had a movie distributed by Saban. And that company, they actually had money that they put into the marketing. They actually did do a deal with Paramount to release his picture. And that, there's still a side of his story, though, where he also still had to keep pushing to get an audience to come and watch the film. It's never going to be entirely... look, one reason it's like, why do studios pay almost $30 million to release a movie? Well, they're doing that as well because they're getting through to the masses, through all the noise and making sure that people know that this thing exists. One of my favorite filmmakers, Luc Besson, I might be saying his name incorrectly there, but he made a movie called Dogman that stars Caleb Landry Jones. And I was so over the moon about seeing this movie, and it hit AMC. And no one even knew. I just watched it like a week ago. And I'm like calling people like, oh my God, his new movie, you got to go see this. Caleb does remarkable in this picture. And it is an amazing movie. If you haven't gotten to see it yet, go watch this picture. But the point is that I, as someone who goes to the movie theater 3 times a week, didn't even know it was coming. So if you're not marketing your movie, and let's just say you're an individual in Kentucky who just made a first feature film in the scary genre, and they're trying to put that picture out and they put it out with Gravitas Ventures or another distributor, if you don't market your film, you can't expect that it's going to get out into the ether and be seen by 1 million people.
Sure, and even when there is a bigger release, it has such a short window of time for our attention,
Truly.
So it just may be like a blurb of a week that we hear about it, see billboards around LA, and then that's it.
And another facet is, I always told my investors on clowning specifically that just give me a little time and wait until I make my next film. Because it's also putting out more work. Because if you put out another film and it has some success, there's gonna be, let's say, 1 million filmmakers around the planet, or whatever that number is. They might go back and actually pay to rent your first movie. And then there's where it starts to make its money. So it is also a tidal wave of continuing to work and create things. This is not a world of one and done. And also, when you look back at Clerks or Pulp Fiction or certain types of films, like let's say Darren Aronofsky's movie Pi. Well, at the same time, Derek Cianfrance made a feature film that went to Sundance at the same time when Darren Aronofsky won the Best Director accolade there. And Derek Cianfrance's film, I don't think it got distribution, his first feature. Maybe it did, but that was also in the 90s, during a time that we like to look back and think that films made it out like hotcakes, but really it didn't. It is up to the filmmaker in creating that wave of interest.
Sure, and if it wasn't somewhere in an obscure section of Blockbuster, we might not have found it.
Yeah, it's true.
How many platforms has Clowning been released on?
Between 12 and 14. Yeah, it's been released it just came out on Fandango. Yeah, I was really surprised by that, so that's exciting.
Has Gravitas Ventures made your life easier?
I would say I would have no idea how to hit up all these individuals. You can always go through an aggregator and pay money to put something on Prime, but it's so obvious when a film has gone through an aggregator, which because they're only released on 2 or 3 platforms.
Oh.
And so like when a financier will look at something like that, they can actually comprehend how something's being released. So if your film's released on 8 or 10 platforms or more, then it's very obvious that there's an entity pushing it. And then that makes you a backed filmmaker. So it's all a resume builder for the filmmaker for sure.
What have you done to market the movie?
For marketing, on Clowning specifically, that was a big learning curve because we put the whole budget into the film. So making the movie with $165,000, all of that went into the making of the movie. Now I know going into future movies that 10 to 20K should be set aside for marketing purposes. So me and a couple of producers, we put our own money together and we did some Google ads, word of mouth. But on the marketing side, I think it's incredibly important now when you make something to pre-plan what you're going to try to do to get it released. Where are you going to put stuff? And definitely that was a part of my learning curve with Clowning, is not being sure. Because, before you sell a movie, there's a lot of aspects of selling a movie you're not really thinking about, because it's a large enough job to write a screenplay. It's a giant job to make a finished movie. And then to release, it's a whole nother mountain to climb. So it was, but I think generally, I've had some friends who release music videos and get 1 million views. And so on YouTube, you can pay $500 to $1,000 to do sponsored ads. And if somebody watches that ad over, I believe, 5 to 10 seconds, I think it's like 8 to 10 seconds, it becomes a view. And then that can drive a lot of people to your music video or trailer for a movie or whatever it is you're trying to promote. But Eli Roth, he did something with some of his most recent filmmaking endeavors. I'm not sure if Thanksgiving was made this way, maybe so, but I know he's promoted directly to Facebook groups himself. So he's found his audiences and promoted. And then there's a company called Show and Tell out there. I don't know every detail about this company right now. I'm still learning about what they do. But this company, they help filmmakers get their films to the right audiences and then make sure the filmmakers get paid. So they're a new entity, but some of my filmmaking friends have been having some really good successes with that company.
Yeah, I love the idea of Facebook groups and things, but even Facebook groups, Reddit, you can get shut down by the moderator after a while because it feels spammy. So I think that's a tough thing, to kind of be in. It seems like you would have to already be in there, genuinely engaging with people.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I don't have a ton of experience with trying to do a lot of promoting. As a creator, I'm constantly chasing this creative wave, but I'm not super good at self-promotion.
Sure.
Yeah, which I think is a big hang up for a lot of creators. And a lot of us don't want to sit here and focus on our Instagram or make a YouTube channel or. So Yeah, what are you gonna do? You miss 100% of the shots you don't take, and sometimes you don't have time to take certain shots. So,
Right. Unless you weave some creativity into the Instagram or the YouTube channel.
truly,
Then it doesn't feel like work. But yeah, if you just feel like you're sort of like marketing something and that's not your shtick, you're not
yeah.
really a marketer. Some people love it, they thrive on it. I can see how it would feel like work.
Also, too, like making a YouTube video versus a film, they're different art forms. So, like, if somebody's good at, like, let's say making a film, and then they go to try to make a YouTube video, it might be very unsuccessful. It's just the same thing that Stephen King said about why he still writes short stories. As he said, because at some point an interviewer had asked them, why keep writing these books on short stories? You're writing these successful novels. And he said, well, a short story and a novel are two different art forms, and I like to stay sharp on both. And so I'd imagine making a YouTube channel, a successful YouTube channel, or any kind of YouTube videos, it's a different kind of muscle you have to flex. You have to make so many videos probably every week, keep putting them out very consistently, building that audience, because we have such short attention spans now. So to keep people engaged, I mean, you have to keep putting stuff out, and it's a different kind of workload, for sure.
When did you start meditating?
I tried to meditate on and off years and years ago. Every once in a while, like I love David Lynch. So when I was like watching Blue Velvet or stuff like that and reading, he had a book called Catching the Big Fish, I think it was called. And in that book, he talks about meditating. And there's a little bit of time there about 10 years ago that I was trying to meditate. And it's so hard to stay consistent, when you start something new, like working out or going to bed early or eating proper. It's like you're like on this trajectory, I'm doing it often, and it's just gone, and you're just stop doing what you're doing. Meditation was like that for me. But about a year ago, a year and a half around about, when I went through this tragedy, when my landlord passed away in my arms, there was a moment where coming out of that, I was doing these bubble baths every day, and I still am always taking a bubble bath. Actually, a lot of friends of mine have this ongoing joke now that I talk about it too often, that I bring up a bubble bath so consistently. Like, who is this guy? Who talks about a bubble bath every day? And I'm like, well, you don't know until you try, okay? When you get in that bath and you're just... So it's like meditation came back to me through this span of just relaxing. And then I started to really meditate, and I really comprehended what it was, not even having to sit there and do what you think, but even you can lay and just clear your mind. And the whole point is consistently stopping your mind from racing. And even if you do it for 10 minutes a day, I find it causes me to take more time to comprehend the choices I'm about to make. Much more clear-headed than any other moment. And gosh, it's so important to my lifestyle now and so difficult to tell people about, because I think a lot of people are kind of judgmental when they're like, oh, you meditate? Okay, well, I would never do that. I could, but really, actually, we all kind of meditate. There's moments like, let's say you're filled with stress and you suddenly are like, all right, let me relax. And you follow your breathing, you're starting to meditate. You're literally starting to bring yourself into this place. And so meditation is just, without stress induced, just going there on your own, taking the time. I love to turn everything off and just lay down. I have this little eye mask to block light out, and then I just focus on my breathing. And every time, so I'll start counting my breaths, and every time my mind starts to trail, I'll come right back and just start counting my breaths. And it's okay. I think a lot of people sit down to meditate and they feel like they're not successful because they keep losing track of their mind. But that's actually the point of meditation, is to realign yourself over and over. And eventually, as you keep doing it, you'll be able to hold on to your mind longer and it won't trail off as easy. And then I get this real weird sense of alignment when I come out of it and I take the mask off after just 10 minutes. And I'll feel so calm. For hours, I'll feel so calm. And sometimes I feel like ideas just start to come to me so much more frequently. And I'll tell you what, like I was smoking weed often a while ago. I've been completely sober now for maybe a year and a half or so. But throughout my life, I was smoking weed on and off, and weed's not that big of a deal. Now it's legal all over the place. But then I realized being sober and meditating, there is something to your antenna being very clear. Mm-hmm. And and we just don't see weed as being such a negative thing. But then also too, that's just the same thing as always putting stress on yourself. And that bogs your mind down. And so meditation can help with everything to some degree.
Yeah, there's a lot of debate on sort of the lifestyle choices that you make with marijuana. I've never been a pot smoker, but I do see a lot of people, and I'm not talking about for chronic pain, that's different, or some other disease, but it does seem to stifle your initiative. I don't know, some people say they're more creative with it, so be it. But I do think that there's a downside to it, and it's kind of glossed over. But anyway.
Well, I did a lot of exploratory sides of marijuana. And I can say this for a fact. When you're completely sober and you first smoke weed for a week or so, I feel the creative juices just firing on all cylinders in a crazy way. And then I feel it subside as you're smoking consistently. And then when you get sober for about a week or two, things are firing on all cylinders. So I think it goes back to that whole inclination of everything in moderation. You do too much of anything, it might stifle what you're doing. And then like you said, it really depends on the individual. Like somebody might smoke a little bit of weed and it might actually put them in a very paranoid state and they'll never be creative. And so it really depends on what it is you're after. Like one time I wrote half of a script, just obliterated every moment, and then I got stark sober for the second half of the script, and it had to do with where the character was going. And that script is really quite intriguing, and there was something to it, but I'm very much enjoying having all of that out of my life because inevitably there is a paranoia that comes with doing too much of that substance, and my head starts to... Our minds already go crazy. Like we're on the phone with somebody, it's a great phone call, you hang up, and then 2 seconds later you're like, oh, did I say something wrong? And it's like, so there's so much there to try to calm down anyways. And so spiraling back to meditation, that really does actually help align a lot of those inner thoughts because, I think it's a daily thing that we all deal with this constant, how am I being viewed? And really putting a lot of words in other people's mouths in our minds that they've never said.
Right, and they may be thinking that, and it's learning. What was the name of the book? Terry Cole Whitaker. What other people think of me is none of my business, which is a very hard thing to do. But yeah, so what's the Jerry Garcia quote? Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not after you. But anyway, yeah, it's letting go of a lot of stuff, and we're all kind of groomed to put stuff out on social media and say, hey, look how great everything is. And so that sounds wonderful that you're inspiring me. I don't meditate, but it's inspiring me. How did you learn to meditate?
Well, there's all these great videos of different individuals out there. There's these great videos of deep, there's a lot of people who are able to meditate very well. And there's some people walking you through processes. It's really just simply breathing through your nose, taking deep breaths and breathing in, but then releasing slowly, slower than what you've breathed in, and bringing yourself into a particular state, counting it and stopping your mind from going on this trail, wandering through the forest of doubt that we all live within. Trial and error, but then also too, like, you don't really have to learn how to do it. Here's the truth. It's just closing your eyes, focusing on your breath, and keep clearing your mind. That's it. Nothing more. That's all meditation is. You just clear your mind, and every time it starts to go to something, like if you're sitting here and breathing in and you're just focusing on your breath, the next thing you know, you think, oh, wait, the store's going to close in 30 minutes. Oh, got to come back and just focus on your breath. Focus on your breath. And then before you know it, it'll be 30 minutes later. And that is meditation, really, truly. There's all these ideas of meditation bowls. Well, the point is the sound of the bowl is what you're focusing on. And that helps clear your mind. But you can just sit there and just focus on your breaths.
Right. Yeah, there's some amazing ASMR or also just different these Tibetan bowls or tuning fork or things like that.
Yeah.
And it's very calming.
And you can find really great videos on YouTube of those sounds. Put
Right.
an eye mask on, lay down, focus on them, focus on your breathing, and before you know it, I say lay down because I had this misinterpretation that I had to be sitting up and cross-legged, and one reason for that is because you're the most comfortable when your back is totally straight, and you're the most comfortable, and so you can actually sit there like that for a long period of time, but laying down, as long as you're just in a comfortable state, whatever that is.
How does meditation help with creative pursuits?
I think it goes back to clearing your mind, truly just clearing your mind of that extra baggage and trying to stay focused on what it is you're after, especially when we're talking about filmmaking, because a lot of times you'll find you'll find yourself in a place of I want to make this thing, and you'll be on this trail trying to make it, right? Well, that first thought, you had an idea of what it should be. 9 months later, you'll start to lose track of that idea. So I find meditating and keeping my head clear kind of keeps me aligned with my original objective. And so it's so easy. Once you bring 20 or 30 people together and they're all giving you their opinions of what it is you're making, it kind of changes. Maybe your opinion changes. And maybe it's for the best. But there are moments where it ends up hindering what you're doing, and you try to follow a different trail that maybe you shouldn't even be following necessarily.
Sure. And have you done a whole macrobiotics or different type of other lifestyle choices, or no, just the meditation?
Well, I do a whole lot of different things. My whole day with the to-do lists and meditating and taking a bubble bath and waking up at a particular time and going outside before caffeine for 30, 45, some time, and actually realigning certain facets. There's a dead hang you can do from a bar that helps relieve a lot of tension in your back and your hips. And so I've got a habit of doing all these facets, and they all started on their own. So I would be like, I'm going to wake up and go outside every day. And then over time, they've just built up to where this whole lifestyle of, but I still eat a 3x2 at In-N-Out. I love to eat salads, but I'll eat a triple-decker hamburger, whenever I feel like it, which might be more often than not. And I ate a ton of pizza. So it's not like I'm trying to live super clean, but I'm trying to relieve myself of the pressures that we put on ourselves, and then also the pressure on our spine, because as you guys know, making films or any kind of work like this, you're sitting down all the time. And whether it's at a computer or what we're doing right now, it's like we're rarely up running around. That's why I love Devoted in Time so much, because a lot of time is spent actually running around with the camera. I'm not actually as immobile at this moment, but filmmaking is all the same. I'll be at an editing chair for a year, so making sure. But that's why I still skateboard every day. It's still important to, I go out and I skate for an hour or so and don't jump down stairs or on handrails anymore, but, doing something active.
And standing desks are wonderful.
Yeah.
And you can have a walking pad underneath it. But yeah, sitting is so bad. I try to have a rule that I will not be sitting before noon. Mm-hmm. And if I can really push it, I try to do it, at least past 3, no sitting. So I find it just, sitting can also make you depressed and lethargic. And I really notice the difference. So.
Yeah. Well, they say if you don't use it, you lose it. So your muscles, right. You have to utilize them a little bit. And then how a lot of people squat in other cultures? It's like our body was meant to be able to squat like that throughout our lives. But yeah, in our particular culture, we don't really generally squat very often.
Right, yeah.
So we're sitting in these kind of particular positions and Also too, like ever since we started talking about meditation, I've kept my back straight because I also think a lot about the fact that I'm slouching a lot of the times. And that, I mean, that's something to consistently think about. Because if you're sitting all the time, we find ourselves slouching and, in a particular way.
Right.
But,
And again, that also causes low mood and lethargy.
oh yeah.
How many cats do you have?
I have 2 cats. It's actually an interesting story how they both came about. One of them name is Phoebe, and the other one's name is Jax. So Phoebe's the one that's on top of Jax.
Right.
And they love each other.
That's
and,
great.
So Phoebe, I actually got her during the pandemic. There was a young lady who her mother passed away, and she was going to move back across to New York. And at the time, Phoebe was her cat. And when she was getting everything together to leave, she had to leave pretty abruptly. But I took in a bunch of her stuff, boxed it all up, and she would slowly throw me money over time, and I'd toss her stuff into FedEx. Once we got to Phoebe, I found out that she had moved in with a roommate who was allergic to cats, and they were like, hey, we'll give it a try and see how it works out. And I was like, no, I'm going to keep Phoebe. And so she was like, all right, you can keep her. And then I was in the middle of doing color sessions for clowning, actually, at the time. So I was going to my friend Joshua Duncan's house for 6 to 7 hours a day, and Phoebe would be back at home. And I felt so badly that she was alone. And when I'd be there, she'd just be attached to me, wanting to play consistently. And one day I just decided, like, okay, well, I'm in with this cat. I'm going to keep her forever. Could be 20 years, hopefully 20, hopefully 30, hopefully 40. And I put her on my lap, and we looked at pictures of cats together for like 20 to 30 minutes. And Jax's picture popped up. This is like 20 minutes in, and I'm just like pulling up pictures. I'm also not finding one, but I'm trying to see if she has some kind of reaction, just out of curiosity. And Jax's picture popped up, and she literally climbed out of my lap, meowed, and lightly touched the screen.
Oh, wow.
So then I ended up getting Jax, and for the first 2.5 weeks, she was terrified. And he was terrified ahead, and I kept telling her, like, you chose him, what are you doing? But I love him so much, and it's, I feel like it's so important in my creative process, believe it or not, that there's a facet of having them around and feeding them every morning that kind of like gives me a routine. And you're not like totally alone, and like a cat kind of gives you that ability to, like, for one, if it's a dog, you got to take them on walks all the time. And I love dogs. If I had dogs, I'd want to have a backyard and let it run around. But having cats is like, you can leave for a whole day. And now I feel really good because these two have bonded and love being with each other. But yeah.
But cats can get needy. It's an interesting thing. A lot of people say, oh, well, cats don't need anybody. They actually can get very needy for their owners. So.
No, for sure. And when I'm gone for too long, I'll be thinking about them and, come back. And, there's moments like I'll see one of them jump up from sleeping and come over like half asleep meowing. And in my head, I'm always like, wow, they have a bad dream? Like, what happened? What's going on there? So I like get down all gross. Like, you okay? Like, what's going on? Yeah, no, they're little people. Like, we like to think about animals, we as a society, where maybe they don't have as much feelings or awareness as we do. But I think they have just as much as any of us. And yeah, I feel like to some degree, all the animals on the planet were here for us to see how we should treat one another. Now, you could say in nature, they're killing each other, but that's nature. But it's a bummer that we're tearing the planet up, and so many life forms were like, destroying the ocean, and then we're so worried about, our Netflix is going out or something, or, it's like, it's a crazy thing. I'm digressing. It's all about the cats, and, it's crazy. There was a friend of mine, she was telling me how her mother, to teach her kids about death, that they would get animals that would only live to a particular time. I can't remember which one they started with, but let's say like a goldfish, and then the goldfish would pass away, and they take their kids through the burial, and then they get another animal that lasts a little longer, and kept on bringing them through this idea of loving something and then letting it go when it passes. And it was really a beautiful statement she was telling me. I thought it was very intriguing and really a good way to go about it.
Yeah, and it's also fascinating too because there's a part of me that wonders, do they know that they're going? If you've ever had an animal go, and whether they've died at home in your arms or you've had to unfortunately have them put down because they're in so much pain, it's like they know.
Oh yeah, for sure. My dog Abby, when I was a little kid, I must have been like 14-ish or something, maybe. Well, I could have been 12. But when she passed away, that was super hard, and she knew it, and we were with her in the house, and yeah, it's not an easy.
No.
It's not an easy thing.
It's very difficult. And the missing them doesn't go away either. You think, oh, just get another one. Well, yes, it brings new joy in your life, but you don't forget the ones that you've had. They're all special.
Not. Yeah, for sure.
All very unique. And they notice when one gets treats or pets over the other, and they get jealous just like humans.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
No, we're all living life forms, and we all have brains, and maybe we have thumbs and we're able to articulate things differently, but they definitely have feelings, and they're dreaming and wants and needs, and
right.
It's talking about this is such a sad thing because you think about so many animals that have been in your life and passed away, and you're like, oh man, geez, gosh, so heavy, but.
And a lot of them, have they found you? Because I've found a lot of my animals have found me, so.
Yeah, well, Phoebe just popped up in my life. There was a moment, I had some cats back when I lived in Ohio, and, moving out here, finding them homes and stuff, and moving on, there was a part of me that was like, oh, I'm not going to get animals because why get tied down, and I need to be able to travel or do whatever is needed. And then Phoebe just popped up out of the blue, and now I can't imagine life without her.
Right. They're home.
100%, 100%. Yeah. And Jax, it's like I wouldn't have even thought about getting a cat if it wasn't for already having Phoebe. And no. Jax has never cut me except for there's been a moment where I've put him on my belly and like he's like laying there, and then suddenly out of nowhere something scared him. And I thought he cut my stomach wide open. He tore himself off of me, and like, oh my gosh. I leaned up. I've never been cut that deep by a cat. Oh, no. And yeah, but he's so gentle. He's such a gentle, empathetic creature, and he was just afraid. I think my phone had hit the floor. That's actually what it was. My phone hit the floor. So now when I pick my cat up, I never put him on my, well, actually, I put him on my stomach all the time. But I don't have stuff in my pockets, so.
Sure.
Yeah.
Why do you think pets are important in an artist's life?
Well, I think depending on what your art form is, I think it can be incredibly lonely. Like for me as a filmmaker, I haven't had that many producing partners that I've been able to work consistently with every single day. So usually being a writer, director, editor, sound designer, a lot of that work I'm sitting by myself in my place. So having my pet there, it's having a person, it's having a little entity with me that I can relate to and appreciate and, cuddle with or, whatever. And I'm sure that kind of joy or happiness that comes from that animal, I'm sure that motivates you in some way. Stanley Kubrick had like 10 or 15 cats. And then his wife said in an interview in some film that I watched that if one passed away, Stanley would go off by himself and buried alone and had these deep connections with his cats. And yeah, so it's so funny because having cats, it's like I feel such a closeness. Even talking about them in my head, I'm like, oh man, I can't wait to go home and just like be near my cats and make sure they're okay. There's always this feeling when I leave the house, I'm like, oh please God, keep everything safe. So creating is the perpetuation of building blocks to something that feels alive. Like something with filmmaking that always shakes me up a bit is this kind of sudden thing that you're carrying all this gear all over the place to create something that you can't even hold. But when people watch it, it makes them feel something. So to some degree, it becomes alive. And filmmaking, I love it so much because it's like you're capturing time and you're getting to move through time. But if you pause it, it becomes a picture. So you can only experience the moving image when it hits play, and you're only reliving that time span. So in that respect, you're almost keeping people and animals or whatever is on camera alive.
Right.
Because you can keep reliving them in those moments. Even if they're playing a character, look at Heath Ledger. You have all these beautiful performances that Heath created. And to some degree, when you watch those films, that person's very much alive again.
Sure, Robin Williams.
Oh, yeah.
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 Because it's hard to imagine life without a particular person or animal, and then, yeah, it's like there's still a piece of them there.
Yeah, and that's one reason why My Flesh, My Blood project is so important to me, because I'm able to immortalize certain people's relationships, their mothers, their children, and bring it into this kind of cohesive manner. And then also in those films, they don't have a clear beginning, middle, and end. And I'm doing that on purpose because I don't want you to have a conclusion. Because in life, there is no conclusion. And so that's where you could suddenly watch many of these films. I actually feel strongly that genre is the thing that holds us back from changing the world. Because cinema itself, inside of a genre, gives us a beginning, middle, and end. But when you break genre, like Kubrick, where his endings were very open-ended, suddenly out of nowhere, we go back and keep reliving those movies. So it's like, how many stories, how many important films, documentaries have been made, but they have a beginning, middle, and end, and you might watch it and feel changed for a day or two, but then it kind of subsides. And my theoretical thought there is, I wonder if that has something to do with the fact that you're giving people an ending. If there wasn't an ending, then maybe they'd want to create the ending themselves. Something I've been thinking a lot about recently, but I don't have like real definitive proof towards it yet, but I want to make things like Devoted in Time isn't meant to have some kind of conclusive end as well. And it's kind of just a searching within the human spirit and learning more about how we tick and who we are.
Sure, sure. And that was a very special moment too when Speed was watching his mother feed the cats, and he said sometimes he just sits back and just watches, and it just makes him really happy. And I saw that moment in time too. There was a part of it that it actually made me cry, because I knew that one day all of those moments in time for all of us were going to go away.
Yeah, and how that movie was created is I would talk to Speed and ask him, what's important to you? What are the moments that are the most important to you? And he kept going back to this cat moment, feeding his cats. And so that's where I had the idea that towards the end of the film, when we see that moment, there'd be no voiceover. I would let you live with it the same way that he wants to repeatedly live with it. And so it's like finding those particular moments and putting them together. For instance, Rob Pryor, who's in Devoted in Time, him and his wife, they were on a particular type of boat when they got engaged. And he had stashed a note in a bottle in the water, and she found it. Well, I'm going to recreate that sequence in Devoted in Time, but I'm never going to explain it. And there's not going to be any voiceover on top of it. And it's going to be this moment in time similar to when Speed was feeding, his mother was feeding the cats. And that we can just live with and maybe comprehend on a more poetic level. For instance, Speed chose, like the documentary aspect of that movie is Speed chose what to put on the television, or, she chose what to put on the television, or, they're just living their lives and I'm putting it together in a particular manner. So it's just so interesting that there's like fire on the screen when she's feeding the cats, or the planes, and certain elements that kind of feel tied to their little universe in a poetic manner.
Right.
But
yeah, beautifully done.
Thank you. It was difficult. We shot that thing in a week, shot 55 minutes, and it was an experiment. I had to convince somebody to pay for the film stock and the camera rentals, and the whole time they kept asking me, "Are you sure you can't do this with NFL players and their mothers?" And I was like, that'd be a different movie. That'd be a different thing. Like, that would be an ESPN show we could do with 2 or 3 digital cameras, you know. But this is about creating something that is more, hopefully more universal. Hopefully more people feel tied to those moments. And I want the film to feel like something where you're living with these people. Like when we show the photographs, I'm not telling you what they are necessarily. There's only one photograph in the film that gets explained verbatim, and that's of their great-grandmother, who was a slave at the time of the picture when it was taken. But the other pictures is like being felt in a poetic manner, just based on what she's talking about.
Right, her wanting to leave the South.
Oh, yes.
And yeah, I don't want to give away too much.
Yeah, it's okay.
But yeah, no, it was beautifully done, and it felt like you were there with them, and kudos to you as well to getting people to trust you to talk about their lives. That's not always an easy thing. People want to be seen a certain way, so.
Well, you know, I feel like that's a part of me suddenly having this comprehension of my voice and the kinds of films I want to make. Is that side of it I feel like is so pure. Like I told Speed, he had carte blanche. If there's anything he wanted removed, there was never a contract where I filmed anything that I had final say. The whole point was I want them to be excited about the film. Because just for me, it's if they're excited about it, then you know somebody's going to care years from now about that particular project. So it's just being able to spend time on the films that might have some kind of longevity outside of Hollywood, outside of Netflix. You know, I want to make things that have longevity to individuals, you know, and who knows what that takes us. But now it's with Devoted in Time, Rob Pryor and his family are the main aspect for me, that I'm hoping that they end up falling in love with the movie and years that they watch it every once in a while. And then that makes it worth it.
So,
yeah.
Do you think someone will make a documentary about your life?
You know, there's so many ups and downs through the film. I would hope that in the event somebody would want to tell a tale of anything that I've gone through, that there's some kind of positivity or inspiring notion behind doing it. You know, so it's it would be great to show the world how much beauty there is. So I know I'm dancing around your question. I mean, yeah.
Well, it's a lot to ask, to have somebody, you know, show your life and show you the way. It's easy. I don't know. Is it easier to be the one with the camera, or is it easier to be the one being filmed?
I'm sure that there are some sides to my existence that the camera becomes a solid barrier. You know, like for instance, you know, being behind the camera, you kind of have something between you and everybody else. And you almost get to like learn facets of life through that filter. So, you know, yeah, I've been writing my take on Romeo and Juliet. That was based on my childhood, but we'll see. Yeah, I can't imagine. I mean, yeah, I don't know.
Sure.
I like to try to create things, and if for some reason one day somebody wanted to make a documentary about my life, then that would mean that people felt like there was something worthwhile within it to immortalize to some degree. And my venture is to hopefully inspire as many people as possible, because at the end of the day, the best currency we all have is to inspire each other selflessly. You know, to inspire others and not need a pat on the back for that inspiration, but to help people find themselves through some kind of inspiring act that maybe we don't even know we did. That would be the most beautiful side of it all.
And it's interesting, as soon as I asked the question, it started pouring.
Yeah.
And it was sunny when you got here, right?
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
But just...
It's like the clouds were crying, like, you know, there's no reason to make that film. No,
but I think it'd be interesting. But I get it. We all think, well, Mel, no, I shouldn't say that. There are people that actually think they're very interesting, and I'm not sure if they are, but I think we just see our lives as very mundane, and we don't realize maybe other people find us fascinating, maybe they find us revolting, whatever it is. that other people are fascinated, whether it's in a good or bad way?
Well, here's something I'll say. There was an individual who you pay to promote your films. We had a Zoom, her and I, and she asked me, she said, tell me about how you came to filmmaking. So I went into the story of how I became a filmmaker, and she got very upset a couple of minutes in that it was so complicated. She was like, hold on, wait, what? How did you, I don't understand. Because she was hoping that it was just going to be, oh, I went to film school and now I'm here. But instead for me, it was a 18-year journey of ups and downs and trying to find different avenues of who I am to get here. So perhaps there is a complicated tale there that is very, very intriguing. When my dad went to prison, I wasn't able to go to film school because I couldn't get loans. But then later, I created this resume and said I had gone to film school, and then I started being able to be at the Academy of Art and learned a lot about film stocks and shooting on the Bolex, and had this kind of backdoor into talking to professors. So I know that's pretty strange, but yeah, what are you gonna do? Life is interesting.
Strange or just fascinating, whether it was hard for the individual or just being an observer. And we also bump up our own lives and hold a mirror of our own lives against someone else's story usually.
It's true.
And compare where we are, whether we can relate or whether we feel like, wow, I shouldn't feel bad about my problems, or this person had it so easy, why are they complaining? We do all, it runs the gamut.
Actually something occurs to me, and this is a really big truth in my life, and that is filmmaking set me free, but it also put me in a box. So I actually denied a large portion of who I am when I first started making films the first 5 to 8 years. So loving to skateboard, loving video games, having piercings and tattoos. Stanley Kubrick didn't have that stuff. So there was a side of this in the very beginning. I started to push against skating. I started to push against all these facets of my life. And when I went to San Francisco 8 years ago, I refound skateboarding again. And slowly over the course of these 8 years, that's the real journey of me finding my voice. Because through that, I started to realize, I am an individual, and I love skateboarding, I love video games, I love making movies. Even a lot of people don't know this, but I'm actually making video games on the side under the name Hiccup. And I don't really advertise that, but that's just something that I do in my spare time. Because during the pandemic, it led me down that route when we thought we might not be able to work with actors in person. I was like, well, how can I tell stories to kids? How can I get through to people? And I was like, oh, well, you can make video games, and so much of that technology is free to download. You just got to learn it. But it's this big journey of feeling lost and denying a part of yourself because you must be seen as this particular thing. And then realizing, no, we're just, we're great with who we are. We're already enough. We just have to accept it within ourselves.